Hello everyone. Welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, The Psychology of Change for Project Managers. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michael Getz and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs that we offer, please contact the Information Center. And now for the program. Every project introduces some degree of change. For you, as the project manager, the secret is to acknowledge the change and address it, both proactively and reactively. In this webinar, we will introduce a sampling of successful strategies for tackling change using basic psychology, proven tools, and real-life stories. The focus will be primarily on stakeholder and communication management, with considerations around risk and team makeup. Ultimately, we strive to shift your view of resistance to your project and strengthen your ability to successfully navigate project-driven organizational change. Today's topics include: all projects are not created equal, what causes resistance, working with those affected by the change, who are your change agents, and your communication plan on steroids. Please join me in welcoming Kay Quinn, today's lecturer. Kay?
Okay. Thanks, Michael, and thanks to the University of Minnesota's College of Continuing and Professional Studies for hosting today the webinar, The Psychology of Change for Project Managers. Just a quick introduction of who I am. Again, my name is Kay Quinn, and I come to you with over 30 years of leadership experience from Cargill in all facets of project management, as well as strategy and some organizational change, which I got into as I love the human side of project management. So that's where today's topic came from for me. I'm a career project manager. I have managed multi-million-dollar projects, led senior project managers, established project management offices, and assessed quality assessments of strategic high-risk initiatives globally. I've been a public speaker and educator for quite some time in global corporate settings, conferences, and in the university classrooms. And here. I served as an adjunct professor for the University of St. Thomas's Executive Education Program, and now I am currently an adjunct professor here at the University of Minnesota's Project Management Certificate Program. I myself am a certified project management professional through the internationally recognized Project Management Institute, and I served on the board of directors there in our local Minnesota chapter. And I received my undergraduate and executive MBA here at the University of Minnesota Carlson School of Business. So the psychology of change, today's topic, is one of my favorite topics in project management. Again, reiterating, I love the human side of project management. As trying as it can be, it's also very rewarding when it works. So why do we care about this topic even? So why do we care about organizational change as project managers? Well, on the next slide here, if you look at the very bottom, I want to highlight that the source of this is from PMI Pulse of the Profession article called Enabling Organizational Change Through Strategic Initiatives. And it's from March 2014, and PMI has done a plethora of work in organizational change since that time, but I like this study, and I haven't seen another reenacted yet. But if you go up to the top, it's a study of 276 project managers regarding organizational change proficiency in their organization. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a diagram showing that few organizations effectively manage their strategic initiatives. So on the left-hand side, the first bullet point, we have most of the 276 project managers who self-reported on their project success and that were studied. Actually, they didn't self-report it, they were studied. It was determined whether the project was a success or not, and how much of that had to do with the organization's proficiency in organizational change. So most of them were moderately effective. So if you look on the right-hand side, that's that blue slice, that's 64%. Now, if you look at the gray slice, that's the minimally effective organizations for organizational change management. and their project success was about 31%. So about a third of their projects were deemed to be a success, that they met the objective of the project. So the other 18% then were those who were deemed to be highly effective at organizational change. And when their projects were looked at and evaluated on their success of meeting the objective, it was twice that, so 65%. So that is kind of, I'm giving you just a snippet of a very good article. Go look at the article, but I'm just quickly trying to just kind of lay out the bit of data that they showed to come to the conclusion that when your organization is good at change, so that 18% in the red slice, twice as many of your strategic initiatives, in this case 65% as opposed to 31%, are successful. So as project managers, we want our projects to be a success. So today, we're just going to take a quick look at organizational change in the time that we have, and let's start getting better at it. This is what I tried to do throughout my whole career and continue to strive to do. So moving on, let's just first take a look at today's purpose and topic. How many people do we have on the line, Michael?
We have approximately over 400 people online right now.
Okay, so we have about 400 people on the line so far. So I'm going to make an assumption about you as an audience, and that is that you decided to tune in today because you have, or you are, or you plan to be part of some kind of project or initiative, or even a situation where you are going to introduce change that might be, or maybe even is, being resisted. And if you don't fit into that situation, feel free to stick around because I assume you can still benefit. I use some of this in just everyday life. Okay, so what we're targeting today then is those of you who are in this situation or have been or will be in this situation. So the purpose is to introduce at least a sampling of successful strategies for tackling organizational change. And we'll do this through a combination of looking at some very, very basic psychology, thus the name, the psychology of change for project managers. And then we're going to tie that psychology, that basic psychology, to some proven tools that we all probably know about, and reinforce and illustrate that with some real life stories along the way. So what we covered today could be a full workshop. So in this hour, I'm only going to hit a few select topics. And those are, just reiterating from Michael's intro, all projects are not created equal, so this is just level setting us. What causes resistance is where we're going to get into the basic psychology of change, just the high level overview of that, and then springboard us into working with those affected by the change, just using like a basic PMI toolkit, and then looking at a couple of advanced techniques when you have a situation where you have higher resistance. And that will be looking at something called change agents and a communication plan on steroids. Not a technical term, my own thrown together term. The ideal outcome of today is that you at least identify one golden nugget that you can apply right now or in the very near future. So if we accomplish that, we'll be happy. Again, there's much more to study here. So let's keep moving. In the area of all projects are not created equal. So every project you do, it introduces some degree of change to its stakeholders. And stakeholders, for anyone uninitiated to that term, is anyone who's impacted by that change. So as an example, if you're introducing a change to your customers, you have a new product that you never had before or a new service, and they might be concerned. They might resist that change. They might say, I've even been in this situation as a customer, hey, I like the old product. What if I don't like the new product? Is it going to cost me more? So this is the kind of things that cause people to just resist. Maybe they should be excited about it, but initially people tend to resist. And then if we move on to, you introduce new salary guidelines to employees, immediately they might say, whoa, does that mean it's going to impact my salary increase, or will I not get an increase at all? Educators, let's say we're going to introduce a new curriculum design. The educators might say, whoa, is my class still going to even exist? Am I going to have to redo all my course materials? It's just natural for people to ask these things. Residents get introduced, a new light rail system is going to go through their neighborhood, or a new bridge. It's like, whoa, how is that going to affect me? Is there going to be noise, disruption? Will I have to go to work a different way, etc.? Travelers, new airport security procedures. We've all encountered that. New fees. So how is that going to affect my traveling? Is it going to cost me more? Is it going to be more difficult to travel, take me longer? Okay, and then flight crews, a new type of aircraft. And we've just been seeing this in the news, the Boeing 737 MAX 8, a new type of aircraft. And that was a huge change coming in. And some people on the flight crews did say, our training really wasn't as thorough as we thought it might be. It was kind of launched quickly. And so there may have been some resistance to that too. Corporations or even individuals getting new tax laws. We've all been experiencing this, or maybe new regulations. So how does that affect me? And last but not least, just on a personal note, you or I, when I have an upgrade to my personal device, I have to say, quite honestly, I'm frequently resistant. Because now there might be a bug in it or something. I'm looking for a feature that I love to use and I can't find it. It's either not there or they moved it. And so just looking at how we react personally when somebody messes with our phone or our tablet or our laptop, our email or Facebook or whatever our favorite app is. So you get the idea of how people, maybe we're just inherent worriers, but we sometimes tend to, at first, resist when somebody presents a change to us. So just to get a sense of who we have on the line, if a few of you could do us a favor and just cite what changes are you introducing?
Yes, please let us know by chatting in. Press send when you have your question or issue that you want to deal with, and we'll try and integrate that in the presentation as Kay moves forward.
Okay. So can we get a couple that just chat in, or?
One respondent says, I work in program evaluation, so it's changed that the data says is needed.
Okay.
Another one works for a software system, is trying to update their technology and has pushback from the clients and within their company.
Okay, so software. Okay, that's a really common one.
Implementing a new technology platform.
Okay.
Is another popular question people have or issue that people are dealing with.
Okay. Okay, good. So we get the idea, and there's new CRM. I'm seeing a few coming in here. HRIT systems, work groups being merged together, 2 different work groups, introducing new CRM, curricular changes to faculty. Okay, great. Yeah, these are all the kinds of things that we're talking about. You totally get it, and you're totally experiencing it. Okay.
We also have another one about diversity and inclusion and how the tension within the workplace.
Okay. Okay, good. These are all great. Thank you so much for piping in. And I know you're out there. Good. And listening. Okay, so every project that you're doing, what you're creating is putting some degree of change into your stakeholder population. But all projects are not created equal. So we do have to assess how big is the change that you're introducing and who are you introducing it to. So all projects are not created equal. So you need to know what degree of change you're introducing, nor is every stakeholder. You may do a stakeholder analysis, and that's why that's so important. It may be that some of your stakeholders are only affected moderately, but some are very highly affected, and those are the ones that you want to focus on. So you want to focus on those who are most affected and those who are also most influential with the rest of your stakeholder population. So most effective, most influential. Secondly, I want to get into why do you think people are resisting? And so that's just the next question. So if we could just get a few people weighing in.
We started very small and are now 100 people, and we have to develop new processes and procedures. Another person said, how familiar they are with the product.
Okay, so uncertainty can be something that leads to resistance.
Fear.
Fear. Very good.
Old school thinking.
Old school thinking, yes.
And preference for what I know and the processes I understand.
Okay. Okay, good. So, some of these are popping up on my screen too. Fear of the unknown. Okay, great. You're right on the right track. Obviously you are. You're a very experienced audience. So what I tried to do for the purposes of today is I tried to take these causes of resistance and group them into 3 things that we could talk about during this time, and the 3 things that that I have found the most helpful regarding the psychology of change, that were some aha moments for me that helped to shift my thinking to not say resistance doesn't necessarily have to be bad. It's just part of the game. So I have here basic human nature, no choice, and difficulty letting go. And a lot of what you were saying will kind of fit under some of this dialogue here. So basic human nature, here's where the basic psychology comes in. So science says resistance to change is just instinctual for us. It's basic human nature. Everybody resists change to some extent. And so in the middle of our brain is a little something called the amygdala. And that's what I'm showing on the right-hand side of this slide. It doesn't look like a cog in a wheel, but you get the idea. It's right in the middle of our brain, and it's in 2 parts, and each part is about the size of a large grape. We all have it. It's an amygdala, and it has served us since prehistoric times. Prehistoric man, even sensing a lion in the woods, the amygdala. Sensing a storm coming, the amygdala. Even now, jumping out of the way of an oncoming car, that's your amygdala. Being suspicious of a stranger that's following you, smelling something burning, and you jump to the occasion, that's your amygdala. That's our survival instinct to react to something. So they say all sensory input, what we hear, what we feel, what we see, it all goes through the amygdala first, and then after we assess if it's a threat or not, then it goes into our cognitive brain, and we reason and we problem solve and we move on. But everything goes through the amygdala. It might not stay there very long, or it might stay there very long, depending on who you are and what the threat might be. So once we determine then that it's not a threat, people can move into reasoning. So how does this pertain to project management? So let's say you have someone who is resisting the change. Sometimes in the back of my mind, I think, oh, well, they're in their amygdala right now. So right now, I'm not going to try to reason with them because that's not where they're at. They're not in their cognitive brain right now. So the best thing you can do when somebody's in their amygdala, listen. Acknowledge their concern. Let them get it off their chest. Listen, acknowledge their concern. And then as that starts to diffuse, only then can you actually start to move somebody through the change and talk about what you can do to address their concerns. But first, listening and acknowledging their concern is the first step you should always do. And different people are going to move through the process differently and at different speeds. So it's not personal. It's instinctual, and everyone is different. So that's kind of just a foundation laying for basic human nature. Also, playing into that is the idea of no choice, not having a choice. A friend and colleague of mine, Jessie Fries, once said to me, and it fits perfectly, people don't mind change. They mind being changed. So you might choose to change jobs, and that might be exciting. But if you have to change jobs because you got laid off, that's a whole different story. And you're probably resisting, you're probably not feeling good about that. You might change the way you drive to work, and that might be a sense of adventure. But if you have to change the way you're going to work because of road construction, then that's a whole different feeling. So people don't like having no choice in the change. So sometimes you can't really give them a choice whether the change is going to occur or not, but you can give them a choice in how it occurs or give them input to it. And I think of I remember, I'm going to date myself, but back in the day, sometimes all of a sudden, let's say you were on your computer, all of a sudden something would just start updating. You wouldn't be asked. But now, a window pops up and says, you have Windows updates or Apple's updates. Would you like to do it now? And you can say yes or no. Now you have a choice. So now you're not ticked off that it's doing it in the middle of what you're trying to do to meet a deadline. You can simply say no and move on. And then when you do it, you're fine with it. But if you're not given a choice. So that's a very simple aspect of it. And I'll give you an example. We had a project that we were doing for customers who were buying farm supplies from us. And we were going to be doing a change where their invoice and statement were going to change. And someone had this great idea of how we should change it. And they brought in an example. And we thought, well, why don't we ask them? Why don't we give them a choice? So we asked them, they were farmers, we said, let's gather them all at the local coffee shop and buy them breakfast and ask them what they like or don't like about their invoice or statement, because we had gotten complaints. And they said, and they all showed up. And so we brought in this other invoice, which had to be invoice and statement, which would happen to be from the local co-op, a variation of it. And before we even showed that to them to say, what do you think of this? One of them blurted out, whatever you do, if you're going to make this change, don't do it like the co-op. And so we quietly slipped that away and didn't even show it and asked them, well, what would you like to see? And we designed something that they would be really happy with. So we were going to change their invoice and statement. That they didn't have a choice in, but they did have a choice, an input into how it was going to change. And so when they got it, they were delighted. So you can introduce choice within what you're doing at some times. The final thing on this slide is the difficulty in letting go. And this you may not be able to do a lot about, but just to be aware that this is, again, where everyone is different. Difficulty in letting go, and I'll tell you a little story about this one. It's, I call it the monkey and the coconut. So in some places, have you ever heard this story? In some places, they try to capture a monkey by taking a coconut and emptying it out and putting something very nice in it. The story that I heard, they were putting aromatic rice inside of it so you could smell it. It was something they liked to eat. And then they tied the coconut to a tree. So the monkey would come out of the jungle and they'd put their hand into the coconut and they'd grab the rice. So their hand was now in a fist and they couldn't get their hand out of the coconut. So the coconut's tied to the tree. Their hand is in the coconut and they can't get it out, and they don't let go. And so they risk their freedom at the very least, and their lives perhaps, because they get trapped. And it's very common that they can trap the monkey this way because the monkey simply will not let go. So there are some instinctual things about not letting go of something you desire or that you really feel you need for survival. And so taking that into our own workplaces, just ask yourself, do you know anybody in your workplace? Have you ever seen it happen where somebody has really jeopardized their career by not being able to accept a new change, possibly even losing their job because they simply cannot let go and accept a new change in the workplace? And there may be little that you can do about that other than just seeing that it's happening. Okay, so these three things kind of get into the basic psychology of change, and that this is nothing personal to you. Your project, and you are usually not doing anything wrong. This is just an instinctual reaction to people introducing to change and some ideas to address it. And again, I just want to get people thinking differently about resistance and not thinking of it in such a bad way. It doesn't have to be bad, and it isn't personal. It just is. So just plan for it and keep going. So tying this basic psychology into some project management tools that we are already quite aware of. If you're in the project management realm already, these are tools on the left-hand side. You can address change proactively or reactively. Now, proactively, we have the whole aspect of the project management, PMI things or whatever, Prince 2, whatever project management methodology you ascribe to has proactive tools. And one of them always surrounds stakeholder engagement, that idea of looking at the most affected and the influential. But it's beyond just doing the stakeholder register. It's talking to them. And you can't talk to them all, so you have to identify through your stakeholder analysis who's the most affected, who's the most influential, and ask them. Sometimes I go in with 2 questions for this project. First, explain the project if they're not aware of it. Explain the project, then ask 2 questions. What are your highest hopes for this project? And then secondly, after they're done with that, what is your biggest fear or concern? And if you ask those 2 questions, you are going to get so much information. And out of that information, I'll give you an example of when I asked that question of our accounting manager, or well, actually, it wasn't our accounting manager. So we were doing a project on 100 locations. We were going to change how customers place their orders. And one of the biggest concerns or fears of one of the stakeholders was, in our busy season, I'm concerned that we're going to have long lines out the door, that my people aren't going to know how to use this new system. We're going to have long lines out the door. That was their biggest concern. So when I did the stakeholder risk and communication plans and management, we did that very strongly. We integrated these concerns that people said in. So what am I going to do about long lines? Well, I'm going to make sure that I assess what do I need if that happens. So I put it in my risk plan. So I talked with the team, and we made sure that we had people who were willing to travel. If we needed to go out there on a moment's notice, then we would do that. And integrating it into the organizational change, integrating that organizational change into the project plan, I'm going to select people that I'm sure can go out and help. And in the schedule and budget, I actually budgeted for a few extra trips and airline tickets to go out there if we needed to. So just kind of using this one simple example to follow through. So we assessed and we planned for resistance and somebody's biggest concern. So then on the reactive side, it's all in the recovery. And so in this case, you have to recover if a highest hope is jeopardized or a biggest fear is realized, or if there's any other unexpected event. So guess what? In this case, out of 100 locations, we did have 2 locations who the people at the location were completely unable to work with the system in this new way, and we did have long lines out the door. We got the call, it's happened. 2 locations are dead in the water, they're totally panicking. And so we kicked it into high gear. It's all in the recovery. We got 2 people on a plane, sent them to each location, and they stayed out there until everything was under control. And it turned out fine. But we expected resistance, we assessed it, and we planned for it, and then we executed it when it happened. Okay, so another technique that you can use for higher resistance, and we have 2 of those. How are we doing? Perfect on time. Okay, so 2 things. If the regular tools don't work for you completely, or you just don't think they're enough, so stakeholder management, communication management, risk management, adjusting, incorporating everything into your budget and schedule and your team makeup, you may want to go one step further. And I know that PMI, again, is doing more in this realm of talking about change agents officially. And this is something that previously wasn't part of it. But what is a change agent? Well, a change agent is a person whose primary role is to be an active proponent of the change and a driver of that change. So if you look on the right-hand side, the diagram shows you can have stakeholders and you can have change agents. And a change agent may or may not be part of the environment. Like, let's say in the example of having long lines and taking orders. What we did in that aspect too, another thing that we did in our risk plan is we had 100 locations, but they were in 5 different regions. So in each region, we assigned 2 change agents, 2 people who were actually in the environment, who, if somebody was having difficulty with the change, they were right there on the spot. They were part of the organization, a respected member of the organization, and they could step in and they could help. Now, you can also have change agents who aren't part of it, and that's kind of what our project team was. We also flew somebody out there to help with the change too, but that person was going to go away. They weren't part of the environment. They were going to act on the change, help resolve whatever resistance was occurring, and then they were going to leave. So you may have change agents who are stakeholders and some change agents who aren't, and a mix of both is good. You definitely want to have some who are a part of the environment, though, so they stay in there for the duration. On the left-hand side, you just simply see that a pyramid of kind of arbitrary roles in an organization, but you want change agents all the way through the organization. You want your executives and your leaders to be active proponents and drivers of the change, and we'll talk about that in the next technique I want to show. But also, the change agents fit in there too. And again, just like we have change agents and stakeholders on the right, change agents may or may not be subject matter experts. So you might have a change agent who is an expert at accounting, or in the plant, or in building a building, or constructing a bridge. But you may just have somebody who's just a change agent and not a subject matter expert. And again, it's good to have a mix of both. So building and leveraging a solid change agent network is something that you can do. You don't always need it, but if you have a large project with a high degree of change, or even a small project with a high degree of change, having official change agents and having kind of a network out there to help you communicate is a good idea. And one thing about communication is this does take a lot of communication to manage through a difficult change. So I would give you 2 suggestions as a fellow project manager. One thing I learned to do, you can just ask yourself this: when you put together a project plan, do you assign yourself actual tasks to do? Because that is something that I did early on in my career. I would actually give myself tasks to do. There were certain things that I enjoyed and was good at, so I gave myself additional tasks. But when you get on a large project with a lot of change, you don't have time to do that anymore. So stop assigning yourself any tasks that aren't project management. You got to get a good, solid team and trust that team, and you need to do the project management exclusively. You don't have time to do anything else. And then the second bit of advice I'd give you is to have other people help you do the communication. And we'll show that in the next slide as well. And that's part of what, if you have change agents, they can help you do that. One other thing, the Harvard Business Review, in talking about agents of change, said that you should be cautious about unexpected influencers. And that is, I have a story about that. There can be unexpected influencers in your environment, people you don't even realize can influence your whole project, really. And so I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see the movie Dangerous Minds. It's called Dangerous Minds. And it's starring Michelle Pfeiffer, and she gets out of the military and she needs a job, and a friend of hers says, hey, there's an opening at my school, and she's got a little bit of teaching experience. So she takes the job, long story short. And she takes the job, she goes the first day, and she's got a room full of kids that no teacher has ever been able to teach. They are the most resistant group of kids they have. It's high school. They don't want to learn, they just gather there, they give the teacher a hard time, and they just move on. And so she's determined, though, she's going to reach these kids. And so she actually starts to win them over. And one day, one of the students she has them reading Dylan Thomas poetry. And so one of the students is standing up, reading Dylan Thomas poetry. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, this kid, teenager, speaks up. He's never even spoken before. She hasn't even noticed him before. And all of a sudden, he just rants on her and says, "What are you doing here anyway? We're sitting here reading poetry. This is no good to us. You don't care about us. You're just trying to come in here and be our savior." And this kind of rant. I'm paraphrasing, but you get the idea. He just goes off on her. Finally, she quiets him down. And then she turns to the boy who was reading the poetry and says, "Daryl, will you continue reading?" And Daryl looks over at Emilio, the boy who just spoke up and dissed her. He looks at Emilio, and Emilio shakes his head no. And the boy sits down and refuses to read. And she just lost them all. And so at the end of that altercation, the bell rings and kind of saves the day. But another student, Callie, everybody leaves and Callie walks out last, and she walks up to the teacher and says, "If you get Emilio, you get them all." And so that's an unexpected influencer. She didn't even know. She thought she was making great headway, and all of a sudden Emilio spoke up and she lost them all. So she needed to win over Emilio, and I'm going to let you go watch the movie in order to figure out how she did that, because it's some great change management techniques. But you may have an Emilio on your project, and when you do, you have to assess how influential are they. If they can shut everything down like this Emilio did, then you're going to need to win them over somehow, or you're going to need to do something. If they're not very influential, then you can just move on. We always have a squeaky wheel here and there, but if they can't really sway the whole group, then you don't have really the time to move on. It would be nice if you could, but you can't really address everyone. But if you've got somebody like this case, then you need to. Okay, so build a solid change agent network and acknowledge these unexpected influencers. Okay, I mentioned something about the communication. Now, the next slide is about communicating to your stakeholders. It's really hard to read. Don't worry about it. I just want to set a context here. Usually we have a communication plan. It's maybe a spreadsheet. It says who we're going to communicate to, what the message is going to be, if we're going to do it, what media we're going to use. But this is taking that one step further. So that analysis was done, but this is taking it, and I say it's putting it on steroids. Along the top, this is just a sample, but along the top, I'm just going to take a couple minutes on this, and then I want to just show you two of the techniques in here that are kind of highlighted in red. But along the top, I would always lay out, if I had a really high change project, lay out along the top, I used weeks. You could use months or days or whatever, but the timeline in weeks. And on the left-hand side, all the different roles on the project. And these are just made-up roles. You would put your own roles in there. But in this case, of course, we have a project sponsor. In this case, I assumed there was an official change manager and change agents that were going to actually be out in the field doing some communicating and helping us out. Then the project manager, and then some other roles as well, business process lead, communication training. So in this case, and this isn't even showing all the roles, but these were the key roles. So then if you just follow the second row across, you can just say, okay, in what week is the communication going to occur? And so for the change manager, change agent role, you can see, well, first off, they're going to get some training on how to even be a change agent. And we did have that. And then we're going to do our standard stakeholder analysis and communication plan. And then about the fourth week, we're going to do a baseline pulse check. So we're going to ask them, and I'm going to cover this a little bit more, and this could be as simple as a survey monkey. How you doing? Are you aware of this change? Our key stakeholders, the stakeholders we're aware of so far. And again, you don't overdo this. This is on a big project where you're introducing a big change. Then based on that pulse check, you might say, is this business ready? And if they're not ready, what do we need to do to get them ready? And then go on and do a change management checkpoint where you actually start to integrate everything that you're learning into your plan. And what are you going to do? And then another technique, and you can see a lot of people are doing it, is called the say, do, reinforce. And this is something where we decide jointly what is our key message from the team. Okay, someone is asking, can you give a definition of change agent again, please? Okay, change agent is someone who is a proponent of the change. So they are going to help drive the change, and that is their primary role. A change agent is assigned to the project just to deal with change, to the whole human side of managing a project. So they may be someone who's going to even conduct that pulse check. They're going to be the people who look at and assess that pulse check and say, we got some people who are really resistant, or everybody seems to be on track right now. And they may help to develop this say, do, reinforce, okay, to try to get people moved over. Thank you. Just realized what you were showing. Thank you. Okay, so this is just to set a context of, so what I want to talk about is that pulse check and that say, do, reinforce. So let's just move, now that we kind of set a context here. The first thing I want to talk about is the say, do, reinforce, which I already kind of referred to. This can be done you can have one that's for everybody, but it works best if you have, here's the say-do reinforce for the project sponsor. Here's what we need the project sponsor's key message to be. This is what we need the project sponsor to do, or a leader, or a team member, or the change agent. So usually the key message is the same, but what they do and how they reinforce the change might be different. So I'm just giving some really, really quick examples here on what you would say. So you would script out a key message, and I'll give you an example. On one project, we were making a really big change, and in order to do it, we kind of had to take a step backward. It was actually, we were introducing a huge computer system, and they loved what they had, but it was archaic, and we couldn't take it any further. So in order to go into the future, we had to switch over, and they were going to lose a few things. And we knew they were going to be unhappy about that. So our key message was that we're taking a small step back in order to make a giant leap forward. So whenever we would acknowledge the resistance, but then remind our whole community, we're taking a small step back to make a giant leap forward. So that was an example of a key message, and we might flesh that out, but you get the idea, I think. And so then what somebody might do, like your project sponsor, maybe he has a town hall meeting, and that project sponsor, what they could do to contribute to affecting this change is to always have this project's, an update on this project on their town hall agenda. Maybe in the training sessions for all the people who are having to absorb this change, the key leader comes in and gives the introduction at the training session to reinforce the message. And then reinforcing, just coming up with ways to recognize desired behaviors, to remember to celebrate successes along the way, and offer rewards and incentives. In some projects that I was on, there was even a small bonus at milestone points for key individuals or change agents who did exemplary job to keep the community on track. So you get the idea, and you can be creative, and it all depends on your culture and your organization, what you might do and what you might reinforce. But the important thing is to have something like this if you need to. And then, so everybody is kind of, everybody in key roles is singing the same, out of the same songbook, so to speak. Everybody's got the same key message, and we're all aligned. And then just circling back to that pulse check again, to do one baseline at the beginning to see how everybody's doing. It's so simple. It's a survey monkey we would do on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 or 10 being strongly agree to strongly disagree. And the statements, these were actual statements that we might have used. Very simple. I'm aware of this project, starting at the very basics. I'm aware of this project. Do you strongly agree with that or strongly disagree with that? I'm not aware. I fully understand the impact of this change on me. Do you agree or disagree with that? Well, that's one step further. I fully accept this change. Do you strongly disagree or strongly agree with that? I fully understand the benefit of it, and I'm comfortable explaining the change to a colleague. So that's the ultimate, is that you've accepted it, you understand it, you're so comfortable with it, you could explain it to another person. That's where you want your change agents, that's where you want your project sponsor. But not everybody. So by stakeholder group, then, we would actually plot this on a change curve to say, where are people laying right now? At the beginning of the project, they're going to be more in aware and understand, and maybe not at accept yet. But as we go along, we expect everybody to kind of move up that curve to accept the change, to commit to the change, and to champion it. And you can see how the questions kind of align to the stages. And we want people to move through. Not everybody has to be a champion. We would like everybody to be at accepting the change, but there are certain people, the project sponsor, the change agents, really key influencers that we want to be at the champion level. So we would just watch this. Okay, so use these as appropriate. So again, you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner, this is for areas or projects where you have higher resistance. These are not necessarily seen in, for example, the PMI PMBOK. These are additional tools that come more out of the organizational change realm. So don't overuse them, because then it gives project management a bad name, but these should be considered, and I found them really useful in an environment where you have a large project with a big change. Okay, so we've covered a lot of territory here. So I just want to sum up here, and then we can get to your questions. So in summary, we started out this saying when an organization is good at change, twice as many of our strategic initiatives are successful. So that's why we're even thinking about this in this 1 hour here. We want to be better at change because everybody on a project wants that initiative to be successful. So hopefully you're coming out of here with at least one little golden nugget to apply right now or in the near future. We've kind of covered resistance is not personal. It's instinctual, and every person is different. That idea of the amygdala, and sometimes people are in their amygdala, and that's natural. So, but we need to listen, affirm, and then we can move to getting the change integrated. Talk to these people, assess and plan for resistance, and it's all in the recovery. Plan for it, and then just handle it when it happens. Leverage advanced techniques for higher resistance, such as the two we just talked about. The change agent network, and acknowledging unexpected influencers. Do you have an Emilio? And integrate organizational change into your communication plan as appropriate for your degree of change. You may need a communication plan on steroids. You may need, say, do reinforce or a pulse check. Okay, so that's it. I want to turn it over to you for questions. I'd be happy to entertain them.
Okay, someone asked, do you have an example of a risk management template?
I do have an example of a risk management template. Actually, this is a good time to say next Wednesday I'm teaching a one-day course on project risk management. And I certainly do have a risk management template. And it does go through, it's very, I would say this is one area that I think the PMBOK excels as far as identifying what your risks are and determining what the probability and the impact is of each risk, and then determining of those with the highest probability and the highest impact, what is the response to that risk? Are we going to accept that risk? Or are we going to mitigate it? We're going to avoid it, and so on. The PMBOK has an exceptional process, I think, for that. Two things that just a little extra advance is that I'm really careful how I name a risk or how I identify a risk. Like you might say, this project is going to face a risk because of other competing projects. Well, other competing projects is not necessarily the risk. The risk is what impact does that have on your project? Is it going to be delayed sign-offs or shortage of resources or what? So I digress, but yes, I have a risk management template, and it does go through, if you reference the PMBOK or whatever, it's laid out really nicely in there. But that's kind of the bird's eye view of it.
Great, thank you. And another question is, for those having difficulty letting go, what techniques do you suggest help that person move towards accepting the change?
That's a little bit of a tricky one. I've done that in several different ways. One is if I'm comfortable enough with that individual, sometimes you can, if you see, because sometimes you're just watching it happen. You're watching this person almost hang themselves because they're so in their amygdala or emotional about the change. And sometimes just talking with that person and saying, this change is going to happen. We can't really stop the change. And really, you're hurting yourself by not, how can we help you to make it through the change? Listen and talk to them. Again, they're in their amygdala. So listening, acknowledging, and just going through it. Now, you don't always have the time to do this, and sometimes people don't make it. But that's how I would address it. If I wanted to intervene and I see that happening, and I would just go talk to that person and explain that they are jeopardizing themselves by not kind of finding a way to get on board with the change. Or maybe, in some cases, I've also encouraged people to maybe move to a different area. Because sometimes the change is very job specific and it really no longer does use their best capabilities. And so sometimes I've done, like if it's an employee of mine, I had done some career coaching where I just say, at this point, your skills are not best utilized in this environment any longer. So let's look for a place where it is. And I have had people like just move to a different environment where that change doesn't affect them, and then they thrive there.
Many in our audience are Minnesotans, and we have a passive-aggressive stereotype here in Minnesota. How can you suss out people's resistance to this change if they're not actively engaging you? Because so many of the employees will sit there passively listening to all these potential changes and then go back to their cubicle,
right,
and not participate or not engage or not move forward with the plan, even though they never gave you any indication that they were resistant.
Right. Okay. That's a really good question, because you have the passive aggressive where people are not necessarily telling you they don't like it, but they might be telling everybody else in their domain that they are, or they might not be telling anyone, but they're just not going along with things. So 2 or 3 things come to mind. One is that's why the pulse check can be nice, because the pulse check is anonymous, and if that comes in your email box, sometimes a person might be more likely to respond to a survey that says, I don't understand why we're doing this change, and they'd be really low on it. So that's one way to get it out, especially if a lot of people are doing that, then that's going to come out in the results. But the other way, it kind of reminded me, I don't know if it fits exactly, but also you just being open as a project manager, because I have had other people come to me and say, so-and-so is not on board with this change, and they're not saying anything, but they're talking to everybody. I hear them talking to everybody around them from where they sit. And so sometimes you can get it from other people if you have an openness and like an open door policy where people will come in who do care, and you are saying this is important that we embrace this change, and someone is aware that it isn't occurring that they might come and notify you of that. Now you don't want to make them regret having done that, so you have to handle that carefully. But at least now you've got the knowledge. So that's another thing that has happened as well. But that is a really good question. Sometimes you just don't know and that is kind of a landmine for you.
So how do we know when the brain is ready to accept change, both from an emotional to a cognitive state?
Okay. And that's a subjective thing. This is where, I love the human side of project management because I like to try to read people. And so when you're talking with someone and you are listening and acknowledging and affirming their concerns, I think you just start to interject, to just slip in things like, well, what if we did this? Or how would it be better? How could we do this in a better way? Or, and just and what is your concern about that? Just kind of pulling on what is it they're concerned about, and why is it that you're concerned about that? I kind of think of the Japanese 5 whys, like ask why 5 times. Why are you concerned about that? Oh, because this and that. Well, and why is that a concern to you? And you might get down to that they fear they're losing their job or something like that. So at some point, it's kind of just a feeling that you just feel that you're now more in a dialogue, that the information is going back and forth now. Because when somebody is in their amygdala, it tends to be that the communication is more coming at you. And when they're starting to move out of their amygdala, you start having a dialogue. They are listening to what you're saying and they're responding to what you're saying. They're not just repeating their fear or their concern or their resistance. I don't know if that helps, because it is kind of the squishy side. The human side of project management is a little squishy. But you can kind of feel the shift when somebody kind of opens up and listens to something you say and starts responding to that instead of just being one way.
That's great. These projects, they cost money.
Yes.
And leaders are always trying to watch the bottom line. And so how do you have any advice for how do you get leaders on board with stakeholder engagement, especially being willing to commit the time and money that's needed for that?
Okay, so commit the time and money available for stakeholder engagement. Well, and that kind of is part of just the entire planning I wish I had another slide here, actually, because there is one slide that I use, and now I can't remember the exact, but there's statistics on direct statistics between project success and the time spent in planning. And stakeholder engagement is part of planning. You're not launching in and executing the project yet. You're getting your ducks in a row. It isn't always easy. Like I said, I do have the slide that project success, you have much higher likelihood of project success if you get things lined up before you launch into it. But also, I'll be honest with you, it isn't easy. I don't know that I was ever on a project where I thought I had enough time and money to do the project. But I just did as much as I possibly could. And this is why one thing I always did is I stopped assigning myself to tasks. I would go to bat to get one more person on my team and fully show what they were going to do so I could free myself up in order to do some of these tasks. And so a lot of it happens in team makeup so that you have time to carry this out. Also, though, I would say stakeholder engagement has a lot to do with establishing relationships with your project sponsor. Like I had one project sponsor where I would say I worked really hard to get a good relationship with him. I was ghostwriting his communications, which I have no problem doing with projects, whatever you have to do to get a communication out. So I would ghostwrite it, and then I would review it with him, and he would take out a pen and he would make changes to it. But we got a communication coming from him, and I did it. After a while, he and I had a very close relationship just having done that. I got better and better at ghostwriting it for him. My goal was that we would make fewer and fewer changes. So I know that's a little bit off the beaten path, but again, relationships, building relationships, staffing your team right, and then basically, again, you will never feel like you have enough time and money to do it. You do as much as you can.
We have time for one more question, and I think this is right in your wheelhouse. How do you manage resistance when the team is global and consists of people with scientific and technical expertise and that is not aligned with yours? And how do you influence scientific or technical people?
Okay, well, this seems to play right into the idea of change agents. So having people who are change agents out across, this is like when we had those 100 locations, they were all over. So that's where we broke it into regions, and we had 2 change agents in each region. You might need more. And they were subject matter experts. So you might have 2 change agents that are engineers, or one even if you can just get one, where there's a pocket of people who has influence in that area. So I guess that's the first thing that comes to my mind is start, even if they're informal change agents, just get a connection there so they have the expertise. You communicate through them. And they communicate on a daily basis with their colleagues. So, and there was another aspect there. So the subject matter expertise, and now I'm trying to remember the first part of it, the global aspect again. So I think we've kind of hit that. That's what I was up against when I broke it into regions and assigned change agents over the regions. So I don't know if that helps, but that's one thing that comes to mind really quickly when I hear your situation.
Well, okay, this was very useful and informative. And if for any of you out there that live in the Twin Cities, you should consider taking one of Kay's courses here at the University of Minnesota in the College of Continuing and Professional Studies. But we want to thank you, Kay, for your time and, again, your useful information. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending a link to the webinar recording in a couple of days. There are a few relevant courses listed on the slide if you would like to learn more about the College of Continuing Professional Studies and the Project Management Certificate Program. But you can also visit our website for a full list of classes and educational programs. Thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.